In 1870, a quiet 31-year-old bookkeeper from Cleveland controlled just 4% of America's oil refining. 10 years later, he controlled 90%. Not by drilling more wells, not by owning the most land, not by hiring armies or breaking laws on record, but by building a system so invisible, so perfectly engineered, that by the time America realized what he created, it was already too late to stop him. How did one man rise so fast, so quietly, that he captured an entire nation's energy supply without anyone understanding the strategy until long after it was complete? And here's the unsettling part: the system he created in the 1800s didn't die. It evolved, it modernized, and today, you are still living inside a more advanced version of it. This is not just the story of John D. Rockefeller. This is the story of the blueprint every dominant corporation follows, from Amazon to Apple, from big pharma to big tech, a blueprint built by a man who believed competition wasn't something to win, but something to eliminate. Before Rockefeller arrived, the oil industry was raw chaos. Oil wells in Pennsylvania were unpredictable. Booms and crashes happened every few months. Prices swung so violently that fortunes were created and destroyed overnight. It was the Wild West of business, a place where gamblers thrived, speculators ran wild, and no one knew who would survive the next crash. But for Rockefeller, this chaos wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity. Where others saw risk, he saw inefficiency. Where others chased fast money, he studied patterns. Where others fought each other, he planned to control the entire board. Because Rockefeller understood something almost no one in the 1870s realized: the real power in an industry is never in the product. It's in the infrastructure around the product. Not the oil in the ground, but the refining; not the refineries, but the railroads; not the railroads, but the contracts behind the railroads; not the competition, but the weakness inside the competition. Rockefeller didn't want to compete. He wanted to design a system so complete, so efficient, that the industry would have no choice but to obey him. And that system, the Standard Oil system, would become the operating manual for corporate dominance for the next 150 years. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1839 to two very different parents who shaped his world in two very different ways. His father, William Rockefeller, was a traveling con artist, a smooth talker, a seller of fake miracle cures, a man who lied for a living and taught young John a crucial truth: trust nothing and no one. His mother, Eliza, was deeply religious, disciplined, frugal, the opposite of chaos. She taught him: control everything you can and waste nothing. From these two extremes, Rockefeller developed a mind that was both calculating and controlled, strategic yet deeply cautious, and absolutely obsessed with one idea: eliminate uncertainty. At 16, he became a bookkeeper. While others saw numbers, Rockefeller saw vulnerabilities. He saw which businesses were weak, which had debt, which made reckless decisions. And he discovered a secret: if you can predict cash flow, you can control outcomes. And if you control outcomes, you can dominate entire industries. So when the oil boom began, Rockefeller didn't rush into drilling. He waited, watched, studied the chaos. Because he didn't want oil. He wanted the bottleneck, the choke point, the place where every drop of oil had to pass: refining. Rockefeller understood something every other oil man ignored. Drilling was gambling, but refining was guaranteed profit. Every barrel of crude, no matter where it came from, had to be purified before it could be used. That meant every driller, every trader, every railroad, every lamp manufacturer, every exporter, they all depended on one thing: the refiners. So in 1863, Rockefeller made the move that would change history. He invested in a small Cleveland refinery. Not the biggest, not the most impressive, but the one with the most potential for efficiency. From day one, he focused on a single obsession: cut costs, cut waste, cut unpredictability. He studied every step of the refining process like a scientist. He calculated how to make barrels cheaper, how to reuse byproducts, how to negotiate every contract 1% lower. He even sold the leftover petroleum waste, tar, grease, lubricants to other industries, so nothing was lost. Every penny saved became a weapon. And Rockefeller used those savings to quietly expand while everyone else was burning money trying to drill more wells. Refiners went bankrupt, drill sites dried up. Boom towns turned into ghost towns, but Rockefeller's operation kept growing. Because he wasn't chasing luck, he was engineering certainty. By 1865, he bought out his first business partner and took full control of the refinery. Most men at his age would have celebrated. But Rockefeller only saw the next step. He studied the transportation costs. Railroads were the arteries of the oil industry, and they held enormous power. If they raised freight prices, refiners suffered. If they lowered them, refiners profited. Rockefeller hated being dependent on anyone, so he made a decision no one expected. He would control the railroads before they learned to control him. He met with railroad executives, calm, polite, quiet. He showed them numbers. He made them understand something they'd never considered. He could guarantee them massive, predictable, stable shipments if they offered him lower freight rates. No other refiner could do that. They all operated like gamblers. Rockefeller operated like a central bank. He didn't just want lower rates, he wanted secret rebates. Money back on every barrel shipped, discounts competitors would never know about. Railroads accepted. Why wouldn't they? Rockefeller looked like free money. But it wasn't just free money, it was leverage. Rockefeller now shipped oil cheaper than anyone else in Cleveland. Competitors couldn't match his prices. They couldn't understand how he sold kerosene for less than it cost them to refine it. He didn't tell them the truth. He had rewired the entire industry behind the scenes. And that was only the beginning. As Rockefeller expanded, he began acquiring other refineries. Sometimes with friendly offers, sometimes with pressure so intense it didn't feel optional. If a refiner resisted, Rockefeller didn't threaten violence. He threatened competition. He would lower prices in their region until they bled money. He would offer customers better deals than anyone could afford. He didn't need to destroy them. He only needed to make survival impossible. Eventually, most surrendered. Some joined voluntarily. Others were absorbed after financial collapse. But the outcome was always the same. Standard Oil grew. And while Standard Oil grew, Rockefeller designed something even more powerful than a company. He designed an ecosystem. He standardized quality. He standardized packaging. He standardized shipping terms. He standardized contracts. He removed unpredictable elements from every link of the chain. Customers loved him because his kerosene didn't explode like other poorly refined products. Railroads loved him because he gave them a guaranteed flow of traffic. Investors loved him because his profits were steady, reliable, and shockingly high. By the early 1870s, Rockefeller had quietly merged dozens of refineries into a single controlled network. And this gave him something more valuable than profit: data. He knew exactly how much oil came in, how much was refined, how much was shipped, and what every competitor was doing. He knew the strength and weakness of every refinery in Cleveland. He studied their costs, their debts, their inefficiencies. And when he approached them with buyout offers, he already knew their breaking points. Still, his empire had a weak spot: geography. Cleveland was not the center of the oil world. The real heart was in Pennsylvania. If Rockefeller wanted total control, he needed to dominate the Pennsylvania routes. And that required more than business intelligence, it required a strategic strike. In 1872, Rockefeller launched one of the most ambitious moves in business history. It would later be known as the Cleveland Massacre. Within 6 weeks, he bought 22 out of 26 competing refineries in Cleveland. Some were bought peacefully, some were pressured, but all of them fell. His message was clear: join Standard Oil and live. Or fight Standard Oil and die slowly, very slowly. This was the moment Standard Oil truly became a machine. Money flowed in, output soared. Railroads depended on him more than he depended on them. His refining costs dropped to levels competitors couldn't even imagine. And as he swallowed more and more of the industry, Rockefeller refined his strategy into something frighteningly sophisticated. He didn't just use low prices to undermine competitors. He used differential pricing, charging different prices in different regions to weaken specific targets. He used secret contracts with railroads to keep rivals from expanding. He used vertical integration to control everything from barrels to shipping. And he reinvested almost every dollar back into Standard Oil, not into luxury, not into lifestyle, not into status, into expansion. By the late 1870s, Rockefeller was no longer trying to beat competitors. He was trying to make competition structurally impossible, and he was succeeding. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's refining capacity. 90%. No modern corporation has ever reached that level of dominance without government intervention. But Rockefeller did it when there were no rules to stop him. He operated like a sovereign state inside an uncontrolled economic wilderness. And that's when the real backlash began. Journalists, politicians, rival businessmen, railroad companies that once supported him, all began turning against him. They accused him of crushing competitors, of bribing railroads, of building a monopoly that threatened the entire economic system. They were right, but they were too late, because by the time they realized what Rockefeller had built, his system had become self-reinforcing. The more people attacked him, the more they needed his kerosene. The more the economy grew, the more it relied on his networks. The more railroads tried to resist, the more they collapsed without his shipments. Rockefeller had created a paradox. Everyone wanted to stop him, but everyone needed him, and the system he engineered was now so powerful. It had taken on a life of its own. By the 1880s, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was an institution. Standard Oil was more than a company. It was the blueprint for industrial dominance. And like any blueprint, once understood, it could be copied, refined, and scaled across industries. But first, the world had to respond. Critics called him a monopoly. Journalists painted him as a villain. Small business owners hated him. Public opinion swirled with outrage. Yet for all the attention, Standard Oil kept growing. Because Rockefeller understood something deeply human. Systems are harder to fight than individuals. If you target the person, the system survives. If you target the system, you need to dismantle it entirely. And no one had the tools or knowledge to do that yet. The government eventually took notice. In 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. Its goal was simple: prevent monopolies from forming and preserve competition. But its wording was vague, and enforcement was weak. Rockefeller knew this. Standard Oil didn't just survive the law, it exploited it. He used trust agreements, holding companies, and complex corporate structures to obscure the real ownership of his empire. In essence, he was already 3 steps ahead of the regulators before they even started playing the game. The turning point came in 1911. After decades of investigations, court battles, and public pressure, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. They ordered it broken into 30 for independent companies. On paper, this was the moment of Rockefeller's downfall. The public celebrated, reformers cheered. Journalists wrote headlines declaring the end of his empire, but reality was far different. Within years, the pieces of Standard Oil began consolidating profits, leadership, and influence once more. Rockefeller retained stakes in many of these companies, amassing more wealth than ever before. Companies like Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Standard Oil of New Jersey rose from the fragments, dominating not just the U.S. oil industry, but global markets. In other words, the breakup failed to destroy the system because the system had become self-perpetuating. Rockefeller had proven that influence, information, and infrastructure could be more powerful than ownership alone. And here's the chilling part: this wasn't an anomaly. This is a pattern repeated throughout history. Monopolies rise, governments intervene, breakups occur. But the structures, networks, and knowledge remain. Technology giants today operate on the same principle. Control the infrastructure, the data, and the flow of information, and the system bends to your will. Look at Amazon controlling logistics, Google controlling search algorithms, Apple controlling app distribution. The tools differ, but the principle is identical: dominate the system, and you dominate everything built on it. Even in financial systems, we see the echoes of Rockefeller's methods: banks too big to fail, shadow lending networks, derivatives markets. All create a web where a handful of players can control outcomes without directly owning every asset. When crises happen, they can collapse smaller competitors while surviving themselves, just as Standard Oil outlasted early competitors and even legal challenges. Rockefeller's influence wasn't limited to wealth or business tactics. He shaped philanthropy as a tool for power. The Rockefeller Foundation, the University of Chicago, and medical research grants weren't just altruism. They were strategic investments in social control, influence, and knowledge networks. By funding education, research, and public institutions, he ensured his family, legacy, and system would maintain relevance and authority long after his death. In short, Rockefeller didn't just build a fortune, he built a societal operating system that extended into culture, science, and policy. By examining Rockefeller's rise, a clear cause and effect pattern emerges. Step 1. Identify the bottleneck in any system and gain control over it. Step 2. Use efficiency and leverage to dominate competitors without necessarily destroying them directly. Step 3. Reinvest gains into further consolidating control while staying ahead of regulations. Step 4. When challenged, use complexity, networks, and influence to neutralize threats. Step 5. Institutionalize your system so it persists independently of your direct control. This blueprint has been repeated countless times in industries and markets worldwide. Oil, finance, technology, healthcare, logistics, media, they all show fragments of Rockefeller's system in action. And the real danger is that most people don't see the patterns, which makes the system effectively invisible. By the time the public notices, it's too late to influence outcomes in any meaningful way. The lessons from Rockefeller's story aren't just historical, they are alarmingly modern. One man, born to a con artist father and a strict, frugal mother, leveraged intelligence, discipline, and patience to create a structure so powerful it outlasted both him and the regulations meant to stop it. His empire wasn't simply about oil, it was about control. And it's a lesson every business, government, and individual should understand if they want to grasp the hidden forces shaping modern life. The most striking part of Rockefeller's story is how prescient his methods were. He didn't just react to the market, he anticipated it. Every decision was a step in a carefully designed sequence, a chain reaction that ultimately left him not only wealthy, but untouchable. And the system he built outlasted the man himself. When he died in 1937, he was worth over $1 billion, equivalent to more than $400 billion today, and his methods had already become embedded in global commerce. Consider this: the oil companies that emerged from Standard Oil's breakup dominated the industry for decades. Exxon and Mobil eventually merged again to become ExxonMobil, one of the largest corporations in the world. Chevron, once Standard Oil of California, became another global powerhouse. These companies weren't just businesses. They were extensions of the system Rockefeller created. The rules he wrote in the 19th century are still influencing energy markets, investment flows, and international policy today. Even more revealing are the parallels outside of oil. Tech companies like Google and Amazon, for instance, replicate Rockefeller's model in a modern context. They control critical infrastructure, digital highways instead of railroads, and gather unparalleled data that gives them predictive power over markets and consumer behavior. They buy competitors or undercut them strategically, often operating in ways that seem normal until you study the system behind them. Rockefeller's method control the bottleneck, leverage efficiency, dominate subtly, is still in play, just in a different form. What Rockefeller understood, but few modern executives fully grasp, is that the system itself is the true source of power. Money and even regulatory approval are secondary. Infrastructure, information, and control over essential flows create leverage that can withstand legal, political, or economic pressure. That is why Standard Oil survived scrutiny and ultimately thrived even after being dismantled. And it's why today's dominant firms, often labeled monopolies or oligopolies, continue to consolidate influence despite antitrust laws. The mechanism is nearly identical. Rockefeller's story also offers an unnerving lesson about human perception. Most people think they are competing on fair terms, paying prices, buying products, investing in markets. But the rules of the system were often written long before they arrived. Those who understand the underlying structure gain immense advantage, while the masses operate in what seems like freedom, yet are subtly constrained by the very architecture Rockefeller pioneered. In a sense, he didn't just shape business, he shaped society. So what are the key takeaways from Rockefeller's rise and the system he built? First, identify the bottleneck. In any industry or market, there is one point of leverage that, if controlled, allows disproportionate influence. Second, leverage efficiency and information to consolidate power quietly. It's not always about confrontation or brute force. Often, it's about precision and timing. Third, institutionalize your system. Rockefeller ensured that even legal intervention could not destroy what he had built. Networks, contracts, culture, and knowledge all reinforced each other, creating a self-perpetuating structure. These lessons carry a warning as well. Systems designed for control often persist beyond the intentions of their creators. They evolve, adapt, and continue influencing markets, governments, and social norms. Rockefeller's empire was once obvious in its dominance. Today's equivalents are more subtle, but no less powerful. If you don't understand the system, you may be unconsciously navigating a world where your choices are limited by the invisible architecture he inspired. Reflect on this. The tools have changed, the markets have shifted, but the principle remains. Control the flow of essential resources, information, or infrastructure, and you control the outcomes. Rockefeller's story is not just history, it is a blueprint, a cautionary tale, and a lens to understand why the world operates as it does. Those who fail to recognize the patterns risk being trapped within a system they cannot escape. So the next time you interact with a corporation, invest in a market, or rely on a service, ask yourself, who truly controls the flow? Who has the advantage that is invisible to most? And how long before the system dictates your choices without you even realizing it? John D. Rockefeller's life offers both inspiration and warning. It shows how intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking can create unparalleled success, but it also reveals the dangers of unchecked power and systemic control. In understanding Rockefeller, we understand not just history, but the modern world itself, its inequalities, its patterns, and its hidden forces. If there is one final thought to leave you with, it is this: systems are more powerful than individuals, and knowledge of those systems is the ultimate leverage. Recognizing the rules behind the apparent chaos can change how you approach business, investment, and even life itself. Rockefeller built a machine. Understanding it is the first step to avoiding becoming a cog in it. If this story fascinates you, and you want to see more explorations of the hidden forces shaping our world, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join us as we uncover the systems and strategies that control everything you think you know.